Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24, taking a look at another game from the Shamkir Super Tournament. And this is a big one. It is between Wesley So and Vladimir Kramnik. In the live rating list that I follow obsessively, all the top players claim they are not checking it at all. Vladimir Kramnik, before this game, was in the number 2 spot, only behind Magnus Carlsen. And Wesley So, with the victory in this game, with the white pieces, could overtake him as world number 2. So let's see if Wesley got anywhere close to that. Wesley So with white opts for the move 1c4. This is a move you see a lot at the highest level nowadays. The reasons are often a bit different. Sometimes it's directed against Grunfeld players. In this case, I believe it's directed against Vladimir Kramnik's extremely solid repertoire versus 1d4, where his main repertoire these days, I would say, is the Nimzo Indian, d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, and the so-called semi-Tarrasch, which you would get after knight f3, d5, knight c3, c5, cd, knight d5. Of course, Kramnik capable to do many other things, but just what I think Wesley's reasoning might have been to start with 1c4, and after knight f6, if you go knight c3 and black goes e6, hoping to transpose to the Nimzo Indian, you have this extra option to go e4, which Wesley has played recently. Of course, c4 is a drawback. Did he allow e5 and c5 and all those moves? But Kramnik for this game, interestingly, decides to start with e6. If knight c3, my guess his point is to go d5. White normally goes d4. Here, after knight f6 against the critical cd5, you can still transpose to a version of the same with knight takes d5. And we've seen Kramnik use this move order as well. Wesley is not interested in that, and instead he goes to g3. Having seen e6, he said, alright, just checking. I'm fine transposing to some Catalan. But there are also subtleties here, because his pawn is still back on d2. So d5, bishop g2, knight to f6, and knight to f3. Now if we compare this with a normal Catalan, which we would get after, let's say, knight f3, knight f6, d4, here one of the main lines, and arguably nowadays the main line, is bishop b4 check, bishop d2, bishop e7, forcing the bishop to go to d2, where it's not ideally placed. And of course you do not have that option after knight f3 instead of d4. Bishop b4 would not be a check. So black typically either takes here, however this recently has fallen a bit out of fashion. Aronian just won a nice game with castles here. Or play the move bishop to e7, when white can now transpose to the Catalan after castles d4, having eliminated that bishop b4 check line. Still, of course, the work is not done, because Vladimir Kramnik is the man that popularized the Catalan himself and is arguably the biggest expert on this very variation with both colors. He goes d takes c4, queen to c2, and a6. For details on all of this, I would like to plug my own video series on Chess24, a black repertoire for the Catalan that covers this series. Just briefly, nowadays queen takes c4 is seen very seldomly after b5, queen c2, bishop b7. I think black has solved those problems in all the lines, bishop d2, bishop f4, and bishop g5. So the trend has shifted towards the move a4, stopping black from getting b5 so easily. This has always been the other main line. Bishop d7, queen takes c4, bishop to c6. Here we have another crossroads. Bishop g5 used to be the main move here, but I believe black has been holding his own there as well. Even though things can always change, this will always be a serious alternative. But the move they are discussing nowadays at the highest level is the move played by Wesley So, bishop to f4. Keeping an eye on the c7 pawn, so it's harder for black to go, let's say, bishop d5 in order to free himself with c5. On the other hand, bishop g5 does not put that much pressure on the black position. If you go bishop g5, there's always the option of going bishop takes f6 followed by e4. Well, bishop f4 doesn't do any of those things, so black has some more time. Kramnik decides to play the old move. Interestingly, the move a5, very typical treatment here to prepare knight to a6, knight to b4, or so you would think. But recently the fashion had been to go bishop to d6, immediately questioning this bishop, which, if memory serves, is what I recommend in my video series. But I'm not that sure. Anyway, bishop d6 and queen to c1, no crazy moves like that, has been center of the recent discussions, but Kramnik, of course, knows everything about everything here, likes to go his own way, plays a5, has been seen a lot, and after knight c3 we get the first surprise. Because normally, having set a5, black players like to play knight a6 and put this knight on b4, but Kramnik has different ideas. He goes knight bd7 and he wants to use that b4 square for his bishop. Also, he just played a5 to stop white from gaining space. So knight bd7, this knight can head to b6 and fight for these light squares, potentially. This bishop is supposed to go to b4. For white, the most sensible plan is to prepare grabbing space in the center by going e4. And Wesley wastes no time starting to do so, plays queen to d3. Now e4 is a threat. Kramnik fights against it by going bishop b4, eliminating this idea for now because of bishop takes c3. Wesley so once again prepares it, plays rook fe1. Vladimir Kramnik decides to wait for a move with rook to e8. Posing a little trap because white is not yet ready to play e4. e4 would be very well met with bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and here. Little tactic, bishop takes e4. The point being that rook takes e4 runs into knight to c5, cashing in on this unprotected queen. And next move, black wins material by going knight c takes e4. Let's say queen c2, knight c takes e4, and black is an exchanger. Of course, not gonna happen against a player of Wesley So's caliber. Wesley plays queen c2, stepping out of this. Knight c5, discovered attack. Now really threatening e4 and asking black what he plans to do next, because if you allow white to occupy the center with e4, you're in trouble. So Kramnik plays a very logical move, the move bishop takes f3. Might look strange to give up this bishop at first sight, but after e4 happens, this bishop would be the sorry side. And after bishop takes f3, he plays c6, trying to block out the white bishop and also preparing to meet e4 with e5. For completeness sake, and maybe for future theoreticians to evaluate, but I doubt it. I should mention that there is another option here that looks a lot stranger to me, which is to play bishop takes c3, b takes c, and now fight against e4 by putting the bishop here, bishop to e4, and then try to generate play on these light squares. The computer likes it, but it looks suspect to me. Still, might be possible. c5 next. What do I know? Bishop takes f3, bishop f3, c6 played. Here e4 would be an instructive mistake, because now after e5 all the black pieces spring into action. Let's say bishop g2, queen to e7. This is a, maybe queen to e3 strong. In general, this is a dream scenario for black. Rook goes to d8, bishop to c5, and the black pieces are just much more active than the white pieces. e4 really restricts his own pieces here. Wesley finds another interesting and stronger plan. He starts with rook ed1, unpinning this knight, so the knight can potentially move, and also fighting against black e5. Queen to e7, very logical, preparing e5, and knight to a2. Now, if black were to play e5, knight takes b4, should give white a small edge, so it is much more natural to remove this bishop and offer the exchange of bishops, after which the bishop pair disappears from the board. Wesley so has no objections, goes bishop takes d6, queen takes d6. Same principle still applies, that if e4, e5 tends to be a good reply. But Wesley has a different plan, and the reason he went knight to a2 is to regroup this knight further, knight to c1, opting for nicer squares on the queen side. Knight on c3 really wasn't doing all that much, but from b3 keeps an eye on the a5 pawn, defends d4, could sometimes jump to d4 if the center opens, can jump to c5, it's a good square. Similar things could be said about the d3 square, which is harder to reach though. Kramnik has to decide what to do next, and he decides to put his knight on a more active square as well, by playing knight to d5, intending to transfer it to b4. I'm not sure about that decision. There's many other options. Queen to e7 is also very possible. For example, let's say knight to d3 and e5, trying to simplify the position, very close to equality. Knight e5 played. Now, so decides the time has come to push e4. There are alternatives, but if you play, let's say knight to d3, then knight b4, exchanging this pair of knights, such a structure tends to be too solid and too easy for black to play. He doesn't even have to go e5, he can just put a knight on f6 or a rook on d8, and wait for events to come. Or if you feel more creative, you can think about rook a6, rook b6. Therefore, so prefers the more direct e4, knight to b4, and queen to c3. Arguing that now with his knight on b4, even though it looks nice, the knight is also a bit cut off from the rest of his army. Can't retreat and fight on the queen side, on the king side so easily. So the opening of the position is a lot more double-edged. This is what happened. e5 played and knight to b3, preparing to activate this knight along the d4 square, along the center. Some options here, but I'm not sure about what's best. I believe black's position might already be a little bit tough to handle here, and once again, knight d5 might be a culprit. Kramnik played queen to e7. Now the move was queen c7. Looks less natural, but to get out of the way of a potential knight to f5 maybe was an option as well. After queen e7, Wesley played a calm improving move. I like this move a lot. Bishop g2, getting out of the way of potential knight e5s, targeting f3. If needed, he's preparing f3, or more aggressively, d takes e5 followed by f4 to get his pawns rolling. It's a nice little grandmaster move. Bishop g2, Kramnik decides to force the issue with e takes d4. You could also make an argument for a waiting move like rook e d8, but it's slightly awkward for black that he can't really put this rook on d8 because a5 is hanging. So yeah, I think this position, I might be overstating it. The computer says it's pretty much equal, but it feels to me like it's easier to play for white. E takes d4 played, so decided to play rook takes d4. Knight takes d4 was certainly a candidate as well. But he probably thought after g6 this knight is not really going anywhere. Rook takes d4, introducing some ideas like knight takes a5, followed by rook takes b4. But black still has enough defensive resources. Here, maybe it was necessary, even though it looks ugly, to play c5, let's say rook d1, or maybe rook d2 is more natural, followed by b6, weakening some light squares, but cementing this knight on b4, and the position remains quite playable for black. Knight to f8 is the move Kramnik chose instead. Also looks very, very natural, supernatural you might say, to bring this knight to e6, but it is a little slower. The tactics don't work yet. Knight takes a5, runs into c5, with all of a sudden a double attack. Nice multi-purpose move, covering the knight, attacking the rook, winning the game for black. Therefore, So decides to calmly improve his position, playing rook ad1. Should be mentioned, once again, not the most natural move, but a nice move. The computer move rook to c4, anticipating the c5 move, and now threatening knight takes a5, would make things quite tough for black, because if you play b6 to stop that threat, knight d4 becomes very strong, with a bit of a double attack. Knight d4, c5, knight f5. And white is in the driver's seat. So after knight f8, rook c4 looked pretty strong, but rook ad1, very natural move. Can't be too bad. Gives black another chance though to set up this b6 c5 formation. However, probably this is too anti-positional to even cross Vladimir Kramnik's mind. He plays the move rook e d8, preparing knight to e6. Once again, relying on small tactics that keep his a5 pawn alive, because here after takes, you can't take since d1 is hanging, and rook d8, queen d8, the pawn is once again protected by the queen. So once again, refrains from doing anything too drastic, plays a quiet little improving move, rook 1 d2. There were other options. e5, grabbing more space, was a move. Queen to c5, offering the exchange of queens, was a move. But rook 1 d2, just keeping his options open and putting this rook on a defended square, so that he's now threatening rook takes d8, followed by knight takes a5. Interesting choice. He probably felt that Kramnik would never play b6, which was once again legal. Instead, Kramnik decided to force matters by knight e6 here, but that turns out to be a mistake, because the tactics from now on work in black's favor. I understand b6 is ugly, but it had to be done here. Knight e6 played, rook takes d8, knight takes d8 is too ugly to even contemplate. I think I've said that same phrase already, but yeah, it is not a pretty move after, let's say, queen c5. The pressure is mounting. So rook takes d8 was clearly black's idea. When after rook takes d8, queen takes d8, black is fine. Therefore, Wesley So has to play knight takes a5. That was his point why he put this rook on d2. And Kramnik had relied on rook to a8, recapturing his pawn along the a file. But what he had missed, at least that's what he said at the press conference, was that now this knight can head towards the d6 square, which is very unpleasant for black, and which is what happened. Knight to c4, rook takes a4, and knight to d6. Nice square, threatening knight f5, sometimes knight c8, keeping an eye on the b7 pawn, just making things hard to deal with for white. He had to evaluate that the back rank does not worry him, because he has to meet rook a1 check with bishop f1. But it is not a big deal, since also this knight on b4 now does not have a lot of support left. Rook a1 check was played. Maybe c5 was possible, but after c5 b3, this rook would no longer get there, and black must still suffer. Rook a1 check, bishop to f1, and knight to a6. Already a sign something has gone wrong. If you have to retreat the knight passively like that, it doesn't bode well for the rest of the game. King to g2, taking his time once again, unpinning the bishop, preparing to go here or take, not rushing with f4, which was very possible as well. Knight ac7, knight to f5. It was possible to grab this pawn as well, but in time trouble, in some time trouble at least, Wesley So decides to stay active and not go pawn hunting, even though I'm not quite sure why he didn't take, frankly. There's no apparent tricks. After knight b5, you can just go queen takes c6. But So decided his initiative was worth a pawn, played knight f5, which finds the approval of the computer, as you can see, by our little bar. Queen to e8, no good moves here. Bishop to c4, the white pieces are just a lot more active than their counterparts. That means the threats normally will increase naturally. Rook back to a8, rushing to defend at least the back rank. Rook to d6, now threatening bishop takes e6, knight takes e6, rook takes e6, and checkmate on g7. It's only one defense against that, that is the move queen to f8. But from f8, the queen vacates the d7 square, which is immediately occupied by the white rook. Not a pleasant position to play. Move number 36. The only hope that black had was white's time trouble. He goes rook e8, tries to keep everything protected for now, and so improves his position by going queen to e5, targeting the knight on c7. Another very promising way to play it was e5, introducing knight to d6 once again. Going after this b7 pawn. Better late than never. Queen e5 played. This knight is hanging. Generally, knights that defend each other are not well placed. At least that's what they told me when I was a young man. The black's defenses are on the verge of collapse. Kramnik goes b5, asking, at least getting this pawn out of harm's way. The bishop just goes away. Bishop a2. Threats are still there. Rook takes c7. Still very much looming. So Kramnik has to force the issue and play the move g6. What else? After g6, there is a tactical solution. And this is move number 39. So you, or at least I can't blame Wesley So for not going for crazy complications here. I will still show it to you. The option rook takes f7 exists. Queen takes f7, knight h6 check wins the queen. Not going to be able to do it. So king takes f7 is forced. And now we use the fact that this knight is pinned to go queen takes c7 check. Once again, the king is forced forward, because if he were to go back king g8, white just wins by pinning knight to d4, picking up this knight. Instead, king to f6 is forced. And here there are apparently two wins, but none of them are all that obvious. One is e5 check, sacrificing this knight. King takes f5, bishop b1 check, king to g5, queen takes h7. It appears that white is winning here. The threats are queen h4 checkmate and queen takes g6. However, good luck calculating lines like knight f4 check, king f1, queen h8, h4, king g4, queen d7, king h5, gf4, with seconds on the clock in time trouble. So this looked like it was winning. A more human way, even though not simple at all either, to play was queen takes c6, g takes f, e takes f. Here the point is that after king takes f5, bishop takes e6, and rook takes e6, runs into queen f3 check, picking up the black queen. So the crazy tactics did all work, and rook takes f7 seems to win. But once again, good luck playing that on move number 39. Wesley So instead played the move knight e3, which, good news for him, keeps his advantage pretty much alive. Notice he hasn't sacrificed a single pawn, he just has better pieces, and now he has the option of going knight g4 as well. So Kramnik doesn't really have a choice, has to, well, I'm not sure if he doesn't have a choice, but it's all unpleasant. Queen g7 was an alternative to rook e7, which he played. His position just remains really, really bad, because this double attack will once again cost him a pawn. Rook e7 played instead, rook takes, queen takes, and this knight makes its triumphant return. Knight g4, threatening checkmate, knight h6 followed by queen h8 would be checkmate. So black has to tread carefully. There's no good solution. Apparently this move was the most tenacious, but not a lot of fun either, if you ask me, to play this with black. Instead queen g5 was played, and after queen g5 it looks like black might be out of the worst, out of the woods, by covering this h6 square. Wesley finds the very precise way, which I'm sure he had anticipated, to keep his advantage here. Knight f6 check, king to h8, and knight d7 check. The point being that if black would go king to g8, then white can keep the pressure with queen to d6, and this knight on d7 is surprisingly powerful, covering a lot of important squares. This position seems pretty much impossible for black to hold. c6 is hanging as well. So after knight d7, black, like it or not, has to take on e5. And after knight takes e5, this is a double attack. Both pawns can't be defended at the same time, and therefore white wins a pawn, and that leaves him with technically winning position, at least as far as I can tell, which in technically winning positions is not very far. But here this 4 versus 2 majority on the king side should decide the game sooner or later. The 2 versus 1 on the queen side aren't enough counterplay for black. And that is what happens. c5, f4, c4, king f2, bringing the king. Once again, no rush. In general, Wesley, never in a hurry in this game, always found a strengthening move when he needed one. Never forced the issue. And paid off. King e3, there's just not enough counterplay for black here against the white plan to push his 4 pawns on the king side. g4, h4, f5, g5. Sooner or later, these guys would queen. Kramnik fights a bit longer, but this plan is quite effective as mentioned. Here after knight a4, I'm sure you could keep pushing, but why give up a pawn? So decides to just clarify the situation on the queen side. The black b pawn is not particularly dangerous. Knight c5, bishop d1, h6, knight to c6, knight a6, king d4. Once again, not in a hurry to push any of these pawns, but sooner or later they will come. Bishop c2, notice the restraint, no checks. b4, knight to d4, once again, no f5. I don't want to allow knight b3. b5, because now with all threats parried, f5 was coming. g5 takes. Of course, f5 comes anyway. Some last-ditch counterplay, knight d7, king d6, knight f6, but now white can sacrifice a pawn with a clear conscience, because his 2 passed pawns will yield much bigger dividends. Knight e6 check, king h6, f6. This threat is pretty hard to stop. Kramnik tries one last trick, knight b8. Not really a trick. His point is, if f7, he still has knight d7, king d7, knight takes e5. Thing is, white is winning here as well, of course, but you would still have maybe to work a little bit with knight and bishop to checkmate, even though I'm pretty sure Wesley So is quite proficient at that. Still, Wesley So plays one more move in the style he's won that game, taking his time, preparing, improving his position, goes for the move bishop a4, stopping this knight from reaching the d7 square. And now it's become very, very tough to parry this threat of f7. Only attempt I can see is king to g6, but then bishop e8 check, king anywhere, f7, and the pawn queens. So that means a victory for Wesley So versus Vladimir Kramnik. And by winning that game, Wesley So reclaims the world #2 spot. However, the tournament is not over. This game was played in round number 5. So not only the #2 spot, but also the tournament victory can still be decided. It's one of these sentences that I started and didn't really have a plan how to finish it, which I'm sure you can tell by now. So I should instead end the video, say thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Pretty sure Kramnik didn't enjoy it. He said he was a bit fatigued after his long fights in the rounds before. We'll keep you posted. Bye.